Welcome to the Springs in the Desert podcast. We're those friends that you can take with you wherever you are on the path of infertility. Hey there, welcome back to the Springs in the Desert podcast. I am Jillian, your host, and I am joined today by my team member, Cassie. How are you doing today, Cassie?
I'm doing great, Jillian. Thank you.
Yes, I'm so glad to have you here for this conversation with one of our favorite guests. Claire is back. I just really look forward to having Claire on the podcast. We have so many wonderful guests, and it's just so great to be able to have continued conversations. And I was actually pondering on my way from work today, what are my favorite things about podcasts? Why do I go back to podcasts over and over? I try to get my creative juices flowing as the host, and some of my favorite podcasts, even if they have a variety of voices, is when I can get to know the people who are on the podcast and I can really start to relate to them. And so I'm really grateful that Claire is a regular guest and that we can, your voice is a comfort and your words are so helpful. And I think that is really important for today's topic. For listeners, today we are going to be talking about trauma. And because of Claire's expertise and all of our experiences, this is an important topic to talk about. So thank you, Claire, for joining us. How are you doing today?
I am doing very well, thank you. And I'm so grateful to be back with you ladies and get to speak with Cassie too. I haven't done a pod with her and I'm so excited to get to know her. And it's always a joy to talk with you ladies, to think through these things together and to talk about them together, which is, I think, such a comfort. It's really such a comfort for me too, personally and professionally. So it's such a joy to work with you both.
I love that you said that because one of, I think, the temptations to think in a season of infertility or loss is that you're alone, that no one else understands, that no one else is going through the same thing, or that you just can't share it, even if you do know someone. And so you're so right. It's so good to talk through these things, to think through them, to pray through them together in a community. And I think in a particular way, this topic, and Claire, I'd like to just open up so that we can all get on the same page. I think I've heard this word a lot. I hear about trauma. I hear that used in many different ways. And I'm wondering if we could just define that. When we're talking about trauma in a particular way, medical trauma, what does that even mean? What does that word, how are we using that?
No, for sure. It's a great question because it's become kind of a catchphrase that in some circles, I think in some ways has lost its meaning, which can then make people feel real devalued, right, when they use it themselves. And I think it's important here, just a disclaimer that this discussion is really just for informational purposes, right? It's not treatment or counseling, that kind of thing. I always got to put that out there just for people. This is really for people's safety. And we always recommend that if you're experiencing any of the kind of symptoms and experiencing impairment in your life of the things we're talking about, to really seek help from a mental health professional in your community. Always a good idea. So disclaimer over, right? In terms of the topic at hand. Okay. So trauma, right? Trauma is defined as an intensely emotionally distressing event. Okay. So the event itself and an emotionally distressing response to it. And we're talking really, when we speak about trauma, an event with such gravity that the emotional response to it interiorly in someone actually then starts to impair their function in some way, whether in the short term or the long term, right? So we're talking their social function, their occupational function, their relational function, sometimes their financial function, right? All of these arenas of our lives can often be derailed if we have experienced an intensely distressing event. And when I say event, it's like in a sense, a disingenuous word, because for some people it's like a one and done. God forbid you see a car accident happen in front of you, or someone you love is literally threatened in front of you, or you yourself are threatened with harm, bodily harm in some way. Sometimes it's accumulated small distressing events, often of the same kind, that can create a sort of cumulative emotional impairment based on the sort of intense distress of the event itself. The sort of event in singular or event in plural accumulating, that would be considered trauma.
That's a really helpful definition. Really puts that into perspective. So then, when thinking about trauma from our medical experiences, and I'm sure we could come up with a whole laundry list of things that might look like, but if we could categorize them or put them into maybe some broad categories. I think the definition is very helpful, but if someone is still thinking, did I really experience trauma? What might be some examples or groupings of what might be a possible medical trauma that someone could experience?
Gotcha. No, that's a really great question. I can speak to that personally and in a general way about some of the sort of client experiences in general, right? So I was thinking about this topic that we're going to be speaking about, meditating on it a little bit, and I thought I might lead with the fact that if I never hear the phrase reproductive endocrinologist again, I would be a happy woman, right? Because at this point in my healing journey, if I hear those two words together, I'm like I can feel my shoulders rise to the ceiling. There's this like great sense of sort of despair, really, this like sort of emotional miasma of despair. It's like the anti-Olaf. It's like you're not walking around with a little snow cloud. You're walking around with a cloud of doom, you know? And that's like a minor sort of way to describe it. But for me, that phrase was that phrase has that kind of emotional resonance and really triggering, right? The ability to haul me back in time to a chronic need for that kind of consultation and encountering in doctor after doctor or in a single doctor multiple times, shall we say, a level of, for me, and I think this happens to many women, coldness, like meaning, but very cold, and the continual communication of bad news. Sometimes it can be that. Sometimes it can be a really medically distressing procedure, right? Something like a DNC because you've lost a pregnancy. I mean, like someone has miscarried, a stillbirth, like these are hugely invasive and like very physically draining procedures, and they have huge emotional resonance for people. Huge. And so I think sometimes that is lost on the medical community. And I'll say it has been lost. There's been a growing sort of groundswell in the past 10 years, especially in the past 5, to really start looking particularly at women's experience of pain, intrusive procedures, not having their symptomology, whatever it is, whether it's reproductive or not, taken seriously. There is an understanding that we have, as a community, and the medical community in particular, has not approached their work in this sphere with a kind of tenderness and an understanding of how the human psyche works. Yes, their job is to handle your plumbing, right? But they're handling a person. And I remember vividly stepping into a wonderful OBGYN's office. He happened to be a Christian OBGYN. And casually, as he walked out the door right after an annual exam, which always stressful, I say that word, and I'm like, my shoulders hitch, you know, like, oh, right? That's never pleasant for anyone. And then you add this whole element of experiencing infertility or pregnancy loss onto it. And he turned back to me and he said, I really want you to know you are more than a uterus and a pair of ovaries to me. That's not who you are. And I just wept.
Yeah.
Wept. You know what I mean? Like, oh my gosh. Yeah, right? Yeah, I don't think there are many women who have experienced what many women in this community have experienced, what the three of us have experienced, who wouldn't like weep. Like finally, someone who sees me as a person and not some failed bit of my organs, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was interesting while you were naming off those categories of like things that maybe could be a medically traumatic event or whatever. As you're saying them, I'm like, it's like bringing up memories and I'm feeling my heart beating faster and like the breath is getting more shallow. And I was like, oh, I was not expecting that to have such an effect. But you don't always realize how much these things impact you until you're really faced with something that brings up those memories or whatever. Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, there's so many directions I want to take this, but those experiences do affect us. And I think physically, clearly, we were all just experiencing that while talking about it, very literally. But spiritually, too, as you were talking about that, I was thinking about our 2 miscarriages and my very different experience that I had with each of the OBs I saw with those instances. And yeah, it was like night and day. And I can still, one was, like you said, very cold, very clinical, medical, very little, I think, like care of the human person. The other, I've almost never, I've had some excellent OBs since then, but she was incredible. She sat down next to me and on this chair, like pulled right up to me, got down just eye to eye, and really didn't even talk about what was happening until the end and how different those experiences, what my responses were very different after those experiences. And so I'm wondering if we could maybe talk a little bit about that. Like because I think that in some ways, I didn't realize that I perhaps experienced a trauma until I was evaluating how I was responding to future events, things that were happening, and saying, oh, I think it was because of this thing that happened maybe a year or 2, 5 years ago, whatever that was. So how do our behaviors perhaps change in response to trauma? And what are perhaps some effects of trauma on us physically and spiritually?
Hey friends, it is your podcast host, Jillian. Just popping into this episode to ask you to consider supporting our podcast with a financial gift. This episode is brought to you by staff, volunteers who reviewed the content, and a professional editor. We would be so grateful for your financial support to keep this podcast sounding great and reaching more listeners who need a friend on the path of infertility. Thank you for your support.
I think that's a beautiful question. And I think it really picks up on exactly what you said, Cassie. As I'm rolling off the list, everyone's getting a little hyper vigilant. Literally, everyone's amygdala is suddenly, right?
Yeah.
Right? And that is like the body keeping score, right? Our bodies remember, right? I cannot recommend highly enough Bessel van der Kolk's, right? The body keeps score is that when you experience this kind of intensely emotionally distressing event or events, your body, one of the ways that your brain protects itself, one of the ways it does that is it often detaches. If this is overwhelming, I'm going to shut down a little bit, get a bit numb, get a bit blank, right? And often that's in response to what other people in the room, how other people in the room are treating the situation. As you said, and with all love for many doctors, nurses, PAs who go into this particular field of infertility work, right? It's done in compassion, right? It's done with a great sense of compassion. A lot of their time is spent giving people real sad news. And I think we can hold a space for empathy for the fact that's not an easy thing. And one of the ways they have to deal with the trauma of that is often by a little bit shutting down emotionally. So if in like the patient sense, right? So all this stuff is happening around you, all this stuff is happening to you. It's a lot to take in your brain's, I'm going to shut down a little bit. I'm going to get a little bit blank. And what it does is depending on the severity, sometimes it will sever the connection to your body. And by sever, I don't mean like your head's cut off. That all of a sudden, like your brain can't trust what your body is telling you anymore because it's so much like your heart beating fast, your chest feeling tight, right? Okay, I'm just not going to think about that. I'm going to go a bit numb. I'm going to go someplace else in my head. I'm going to focus on other things. And that doesn't mean you might not cry or in the moment, but in general, when that comes up, I just don't want to think about it, which is an extension of that narrowing or cutting, depending on the severity of what kind of you're experiencing, the trauma you're experiencing, connection to your body. Except here's the thing, right? Once you are traumatized, once you have a trauma and your brain has been trained in that level of alertness, if it happens often enough, if the trauma is severe enough, it's going to put you on high alert for everything. Okay. So I like to describe it. I love a good analogy. I was an English teacher for a long time. So like a good visual is really helpful for me. Right? I'm like, I need a visual. And so this is how I describe it to clients, whether the trauma is related to infertility or not. Okay. So for someone who has not experienced trauma, when their brain gets what they perceive may be a negative stimuli, emotionally or not, right? Someone cuts you off in traffic, right? Or someone says something hurtful at a barbecue about, when are you having yours? Okay, when are you having yours? Why haven't you had me yet? When your brain hears that, someone who has not been traumatized in that way, a little crossing guard comes out. Crossing guard with a stop or a slow, right? And says, do I want to let this in? How should I deal with this, right? I'm going to stop it. I'm going to say no, or I'm going to, it's all right. I'll let it through. For someone who has experienced trauma, it's the SWAT team. Okay. It's the SWAT team, right? It is. And there is no judgment. There's no shame. There's nothing wrong with you if the SWAT team comes out, because here's the thing. If your brain has had to go into survival mode to that degree to protect you, it's continuing to try to do its job. So some sort of symptom comes up for you. Maybe it's a physical symptom related to infertility. And last week, out of the clear blue sky, I started experiencing we're all ladies here and many women, some breast tenderness, right? Clear blue sky. This has not been something that has been part of my experience in probably 10 years because of my medical condition. And I was like, what is going on? Like, it's clearly related to some hormone replacement therapy I'm taking, but I was pretty hypervigilant about a lot of stuff for about 3 days. And I was like, what is going on? Why am I so reactive? Why am I so jangly? And I'm like, oh, that's why. It's because my poor little amygdala was like, we're back here. You're in danger. So when your brain has received that kind of trauma, it's always scanning. And one of the ways to be tender with yourself about it is just to notice, but not judge. So when it took me, I'm a counselor, I do this for a living. It took me 72 hours, right? First of all, to realize what was happening, right? And I've been in counseling a long time. I've done a lot of healing. I'm very grateful for it. 72 hours still to be like, oh, that's what's going on. And to be like, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to cry if I need to. And I'm going to recognize that hurt a lot. And it's okay because my brain was trying to protect me from what it perceived as a threat. The anxiety I was feeling, the emotional dysregulation or hypervigilance, the reactivity, the irritability for a lot of people with PTSD, for post-traumatic stress disorder, irritability is actually a big symptom because you're very hypervigilant. So stimuli coming in can be extremely overwhelming. To just sit with it and be like, it's okay. Not only am I going to be okay, it's okay that sometimes my brain goes back here because it's just trying to protect me.
Yeah, that's a helpful analogy.
Yes. And sometimes one of the things I have clients do is I say, okay, I want you to go out, stop the frame. You see the SWAT team, like, alert, right? Like, someone's coming in, everybody hide, right? And I want you to stop the frame. And as yourself, as an adult, walk out to the SWAT team and say, I appreciate that you're here because I know you're only trying to protect me. I do. I'm grateful. But I don't need the SWAT team anymore. I need the crossing guard. I need that. I know you guys are back there. You guys are back there with all your tactical gear, right? Something big comes out. I know you're back there. But it can be really helpful to just be tender with yourself about the fact that the kind of trauma, including medical trauma, that happens to people who experience infertility or pregnancy loss is real. And people can be full of shame about it. So much shame. Should be over this. Other people seem to handle it better. Why am I being too sensitive, right? I have so many clients who have struggled with that, feeling like my response to this is too much and everybody else seems to be able to get on with their life. Why is this holding me back and holding me down? Yeah.
I'm really grateful for that image. And yeah, too, as you were saying that, I'm guessing that many people could probably relate to this, but as we started, right, this idea of trauma is definitely, like you said, a buzzword. Like I hear and see it everywhere. And I think because of that, I am very hesitant to acknowledge if it happened to me because it feels like it's happening everywhere. And I'm so grateful for this definition because I can concretely say, that's what that was and move forward from there instead of saying, oh no, like certainly not that, or this is, like you said, hearing from clients, we hear that from the community. Like, why can I not process this? I experienced this loss 10 years ago, or we've had infertility our whole marriage and we've been married 20 years. Like, why can't I move forward? And I think this conversation just gives some really great, support and holding of the hand to say, this is real. And we've had a lot of conversations about that too, even grieving. Right? That infertility is something to be grieved and giving permission to grieve. And that's I think a lot of our first steps, happen there in the acceptance of that. But a hard thing to do when we've experienced things like trauma. especially medically, when we perhaps have to go back to that doctor or have that procedure again, or get that phone call another time with the test results, or like when those things happen and we don't quite have the, like, if we've recognized, I guess, that perhaps we've experienced this trauma, where does our agency, we've talked about that before, like how can we be an active participant in our healing, or in, maybe it is a specific person, a doctor, a medical professional, but maybe isn't quite speaking to us with the kindness that we need in that moment. Like, how can we be a part of that change or that healing process?
Yeah, I think it's really important to start, I think, with grief, with letting yourself feel. Maybe even not grief, just letting yourself feel. Because I think that we've talked in previous podcasts about like people, men, women, and then people who are people of faith, often allowing themselves a very narrow window of feeling what's acceptable for me to feel, what's acceptable for me to feel, and what's the timeline before I'm supposed to move it fast to lifting it up. Like how short, you know what I mean?
Yep.
How quickly can I make this part of redemptive suffering? And I think, which is like a beautiful thing, right? Like it's beautiful, that urge to do it. But I think sometimes it's this slowing down. I think it's slowing down. And to return, Cassie, again, thank you for sharing like how you were feeling in your body. Because here's the weird thing about infertility. I was thinking about this, is that any kind of trauma disembodies people. Often it's very hard for them to get back into their bodies, to trust what their body's saying, even though oftentimes the body was like up the ante, right? So instead of just feeling a little anxious, your shoulders, now my chest is tight. Now I realize I haven't taken a deep breath in about 2 hours, right? Now I feel like, and now I have a tension headache, right? So the body's hello, right? It will start getting louder and louder. So how do we allow ourselves then to reconnect with our body? Because if the trauma is related to a medical trauma, and then that is related to infertility, now it seems almost insurmountable, right? Because now I'm being asked to reconnect to a body that I have very conflicted feelings about, right? I'm being asked to reconnect to a body that I have been told over and over again, believed over and over again is failing me, is broken, something is wrong with me, it can't do the things that other women's bodies can do. Just the litany, right? So this isn't even just, I wish I could feel. It's how do I reconnect to a body I'm a little ambivalent about, right? And a lot of that, I think, comes down to slowing down, right? And when you start to feel things like your chest tighten, when you start to feel things like, I'm just really noticing I'm pacing a lot today. And not just because I'm an energetic person, but because apparently something is rising up in me, right? Slowing down and just noticing. The first step, honestly, is noticing. Because I think we want, again, that timeline to redemption, let me offer it up. Right? Like I can feel for 20 seconds and then I will offer this up. Now that's not necessarily a bad thing, but often I feel like, wait, I want to sit with you on your Calvary. You're like, nope, I am booking it to the resurrection, baby. So prepositions are really important, as anyone who studied theology knows. Prepositions are it, basically. Same for the field of English, right? So I hate the phrase moving on, because when it comes to grief, when it becomes to trauma, and I say that not as, again, the cloud of doom, that you will never recover from trauma. It is 100% possible to heal from trauma. Will there be scarred places in your heart that may be a little more sensitive than the average bear? Very specific ones, for sure. But that doesn't mean that you aren't going to have a full life, a joyful life, a happy life. Be deeply connected to yourself and to other people. 100% possible. But I think I like moving forward, because moving forward implies that you're not leaving anything behind, right? Moving forward. But here's the sticker, right? Here is the fly in the ointment. Moving forward requires moving through. You have to move through it. You gotta let yourself move through it, or you can't move forward.
That gave me chills. Yeah, because it's so true. Wow. Cassie, do you have any thoughts about that? About moving forward in that? I think that's a really beautiful image.
Yeah, that is really beautiful. I don't know, I was just thinking of certain experiences that I've had, and in one case, something that I went through, I experienced a doctor I perceived it as cold, and it was a really difficult experience. And something you said, Claire, was like really helpful to me, that maybe he was dissociating and he's had to give this news so many times or deal with these different things. And it does help me to have more compassion and forgiveness for him. But I was thinking also of how after that, I was presented with 2 more similar situations that were treated so differently, where I was really like seen and heard, and there was empathy and care from the doctor. And that really, I think, helped me to move forward. I wasn't as stuck in having one bad experience. I was able to see like a different example of how I could have been treated and helped through that. And yeah, so I think that, I don't know if that's maybe a certain way that you do move forward and heal is through maybe different experiences that the Lord may send you to help have a balm to that sort of experience.
I love that, Cassie. Yeah, and that often happens. It's really interesting how many clients tell me that, and just like you said before, Jillian, that like it was the second, like more humane, kinder, more tender and care for you from just a medical perspective, someone who treated you like a person, right? And was compassionate to the fact that the news they were delivering was difficult, threw into relief what you'd experienced before. So there's like a bit of grief there, right? And that's important to feel like that was deeply wrong. And now that I've seen what's possible, that's even wronger, right? That's even less excusable, sir, right? And at the same, or ma'am, and at the same time, right? Now, in a sense, my heart gets a bit of a redo. And now I can like move. I have something to hope for, because I think data is really important for our brains. The more evidence we can reframe, we can claim for ourselves of what's possible. So I had this terrible experience with this particular doctor, and that was real, and it was hurtful, and it was in many ways deeply traumatizing. And I also had an amazing experience with a doctor who really set the standard for the kind of care I want to experience. Not because he was telling me something I wanted to hear. Let me tell you, I was bawling in that OB's office because he confirmed my condition. And literally said, "You've been running from this cross a long time." Thanks. What a way to frame it. Right? And I was like, yes, I have. But it was so wholesome. Like it treated me as a whole person. And that set the standard. And it, in moments when I kind of despair, because especially if you move towns, if you move across the country, then you're like, oh my gosh, now I got to find somebody human again. How is that going to go? But like that little piece of data that there are practitioners, there are wonderful clinicians who treat people as human, who have managed somehow to keep their compassion about an awareness of what the people that they're going to encounter are suffering. And that kind of helps my brain when it gets into high alert. Returning to the fact, yep, it's possible. I can find somebody like that,
Yeah, I'm so appreciative of that perspective too, Claire, because our doctors are humans too. And we at Springs, we're always trying to find ways to support clergy and medical professionals, because it really could be just like maybe a family member, right? They're typically well-intentioned. They are typically wanting to do a good job. And it's very rare that they have a malicious intent or they came into the room wanting to hurt your feelings but it sometimes does happen that those experiences happen. And to remember, they're human. They're carrying their own crosses. And if this episode could speak to a medical professional, that those times when you're having a long day, we see you there too. And that's that I can imagine giving, if a doctor has a day where they're giving bad news over and over, that has to be so frustrating as well, because I certainly don't know any medical professional who got into medicine to just give bad news. That's not what their hope is either. So to have a wholesome, I think, image is what you've given me, Claire, anyways, of what trauma is, the many facets of that, and how to move forward, because that is important. but that there's hope in there too, that we do, there's hope for healing. And yeah, I'm just so grateful. I am praying and I really do trust that this will be a great episode for our listeners. So thank you, Claire. Thank you, Cassie, for joining and sharing about your own experiences. Listeners, just know that wherever you are, we're there with you. If you are someone who, like Claire said at the beginning, who is finding yourself needing a little extra support, we really encourage you to reach out to someone in your local community if you're needing some help with that. We definitely have friends of the ministry that we could connect you to, who could, if they can't help you, could certainly find someone local to you who could help you talk through things, walk through things, and help you move forward. So again, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much for joining us for this Springs in the Desert podcast episode. We would be so grateful if you took a minute to rate and review us so that we can reach more listeners. Don't forget to check out our social media pages on Facebook and Instagram, and go to our website, springsinthedesert.org, where you can sign up for our newsletter and community prayer list, read our blog, and register for virtual and in-person events. Most importantly, remember that God loves you so much, and so do we.